A 42-year-old woman accused of sexually abusing a 15-year-old boy. Renowned reporter and predator catcher Chris Hansen comes back on to discuss this disturbing news story out of Arkansas. All right, let's head to Rogers, Arkansas, where 42-year-old Stephanie Neiplng, who works for the University of Arkansas in their Systems Division of Agriculture, has been arrested and charged with fourth-degree sexual assault for having sexual intercourse and engaging in sexual acts with a 15-year-old boy. And sometimes in the stories that we cover, you just can't make this stuff up. If you go to her Twitter account, there is a tweet. It's a picture of her and another woman, and it says, "Wear blue for child abuse." So she is tweeting against child abuse and is now accused of being a perpetrator of child abuse. Can't make this stuff up. I want to bring back in our very special guest, Chris Hansen, to talk about this. Chris is the host of Takedown with Chris Hansen, his new Predator series on True Blue. This is the streaming crime network. And in fact, they have an upcoming news magazine called True Crime Nation. You can check it all out on watchtrueblue.com, and that's blue, B-L-U. Chris, great to see you again. I wish it was under, better circumstances and a better story than this.
Absolutely. But this is an important topic, Jesse, and thanks for having me again, because it's one of those things where you're going to get half the viewers say, well, he's a 15-year-old boy. He's on the verge of manhood. What's the problem? It's probably a fantasy come true. But it is predatory behavior, especially when you consider that the woman was 42. And there's a reason why we have these laws of consent in place. And it's because something like this can be very damaging to a young man, just as it can be to a girl.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because there is this dichotomy. There is this difference when you see a predator who is an older man and there's a younger boy or there's a younger girl, and versus a female predator like this, especially a 15-year-old. I'm really glad you mentioned it, because this is abuse. It is. There's no way looking around it.
We did a similar investigation recently on True Blue for True Crime Nation, and it was a case where a 13-year-old was at a party, and a woman who was well into her 20s was posing as somebody who was 16 and convinced him to go on a road trip and sexually assaulted him. And they're living under a bridge in Portland, and for a number of days, and the mother was apoplectic, and they finally found the boy and got him back. But whether you're 13, 14, or 15, you're still a child. And so now the parent has to figure out, how do I get this young man, this boy, back on track so he doesn't have this skewed view of sexuality, of being a victim. And look, when you find somebody who's 42 who does this to a boy, who takes advantage of their hormonal vulnerability, let's say, it's just as vile as a man doing it to a girl. You're taking advantage of the vulnerable, and that's where predators strike. They're very good at detecting vulnerabilities. When we do these chats, when we have decoys, poses 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, you can see the grooming process take place. And when I go back and do the podcast, Predators I've Caught, where we go over these past cases and find out where these guys are today, I read the transcripts, I immerse myself in the transcripts, and you can see this grooming process. And I will bet you that this woman in Arkansas engaged in a very similar grooming process to fulfill her fantasy of having sex with this 15-year-old boy. And it's damaging to his psyche, it's damaging to his growth, and it's criminal behavior. There's no two ways about it.
Let's amplify that, because the way that I understand it, and we're still trying to understand the connection between the two of them, but they were first at a house where they were sitting on the couch, and she allegedly takes his hand and places it on her in a sexual position. I don't want to get even more graphic, but then it's later that day when she invites him over and they engage not only in oral sex, but intercourse. And then after that, sends him nude photographs and sexual messages. That pattern, that conduct right there, that's typically what we see. It starts one way and it amplifies and engages.
She's grooming him to be her little sex slave, if you will.
Yeah.
And it may sound severe, but that's exactly what's going on here. She is fulfilling a predatory fantasy at the expense of a child. And I don't care how tall he is or how old he looks, he's 15. And we in society have set these barriers between adults and children to protect them. And so, yes, there will be people who say, "Oh, well, he wanted it. He took part in it. He's a boy. It's every boy's fantasy. That's the teacher-student thing." That's not the law, and the law is in place to protect that sanctity, if you will. And so there's a reason it's a felony, and it should be.
Do you notice a difference in terms of the motivations between a female abuser versus a male abuser?
Well, in the female predator case, you're more likely to see a teacher studstudent scenario. And the psychiatrists who study this will tell you that when it comes to female predators, they don't like the anonymity. There are cases, and I've written about them, where women have met, teen boys online. But mostly it's the teacher student scenario. It's the male predator who finds excitement in the anonymity of the grooming process online.
Mm. Equally disturbing. I did think it was really interesting that apparently she initially denied this when speaking with law enforcement, but then later admitted and confessed that she had sex with this boy. I'm curious, what do you think that interrogation was like? Because you've been in front and center at confronting these people.
Sure, and I'm sure it was a soft sell. I'm sure the detectives, brought her in after they found out about this and said, "You want to tell us about it?" And she, you know, became anxious and clammed up and said, "No, it didn't happen," and he's lying or whatever. But when they have his testimony and his story in very specific and graphic detail, and they start picking away at her initial denial and that initial story, at some point the conscience is going to take over and they're going to crack because they know it's wrong and they feel guilty about it. And so they need to get this off their chest. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed a predator during a sting who starts with denial and 5, 6, 7 minutes into the conversation admits, "Okay, I have a problem. This started many years ago. I was chatting online and I got older, but the people with whom I was chatting got younger. And I'm glad I got caught." It's almost like this cathartic moment where they know they're in trouble, but they're going to get some help. And I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times. They just want to get it off their chest. And I'm going to presume that that's something close to what happened in this case.
I find that really interesting because I would assume that the majority of them are apologizing because they're upset they got caught, not that they necessarily feel what they did was wrong. But that's interesting to hear you say that they actually take a moment. It's cathartic for them. They realize that they have a problem. Might not be the case in every scenario, because I always imagine that a lot of them are just like, "Oh, I got caught. That's what I'm upset about."
Right. I mean, the excuses often are similar. I just came here to, tell the girl, that what she was doing was wrong, and I was going to protect her, get her on the right track. All of which is contradicted by the transcripts of the chat that I have in front of me. Some will just deny it, deny it, deny it, and it finally ends and they walk away. But more times than not, they try to admit guilt, but mitigate that guilt by saying they have a problem or I wasn't going to go through with it or any number of excuses to make themselves look a little better in the situation. They want it both ways. They want to be done with the situation. They want the interview to be over. But every once in a while, you'll get somebody who just breaks down in great detail. We had one in one of the recent investigations that's on True Blue where the guy actually tried to sell me on the devil made me do it. Satan lured me into this evil. And it was a predator investigation first.
Were you a little skeptical of that, Chris? Didn't quite believe that
Very
one?
The devil made me do it. While at first, and very entertaining, insightful episode into the mind of some of these guys, I don't think that's held up in court, Jesse.
By the way, the fact that this got reported, the fact that the Rogers Police Department learned of this through, I think it was a hotline call, that doesn't always happen. Some of this just goes under the rug. People don't either the minors don't report it, or the parents don't find it, or an adult doesn't find out. Right?
Right, and that's why, we've covered these celebrity cases where, mid-level pop stars have, been involved with, underage girls in many cases, and, the parents don't wanna bring notoriety, and I can understand that, but the problem with that is that this behavior goes unreported and is only emboldened, on the part of the predator. So, it is quite honestly, a big deal that somebody did come forward. And I'm not sure who that was, whether it was a parent or somebody who
Yeah.
knew the woman, or whether it was the child himself. But yeah, there are thousands of these cases, as you can imagine, that go unreported every year.
And now her case is going to go through the system. So her bail was set at $50,000. She's scheduled to appear in the Benton County Circuit Court at 8 a.m. on August 21st, and we'll continue to follow it. Chris Hansen, great seeing you. Thank you so much for coming back on. And again, let everybody know where they can find you, your programs, and your content.
Jesse, we're on True Blue, my new streaming crime network, TRUBLU. Watch trueblue.com for details. We're on every major platform. We have an app that's for all of our new predator investigations under the Takedown banner. We've got 30 or 40 new ones up, and we've got multiple new documentaries in the works that will be there and on other platforms as well. So it's a very exciting time. And podcasts, Predators I've Caught, on every streaming platform for podcasts.
Well, whenever Chris puts his hand on something, it always does well. So I always know you're going to put out great content for everybody to see. Chris Hansen, my good friend, good to see you once again. Thanks for coming here on Sidebar.
Good to see you, Jesse. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. See you soon.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.